And for the better part of this last year, I was traveling around Europe. That included a semester studying abroad with some of you actually, some travels, come on, and volunteering for a month in Ukraine, and then doing research in Lithuania and Latvia on the Holocaust. So I've been really lucky to have the opportunity to have traveled as often as I have. This is my 4th big backpacking trip that I've done. And, you know, on one of the first solo trips I ever took, I came across this word, omestran. It's a Swedish word for freedom to roam. And I really love this concept because I believe as human beings, we have the right to, just because we exist, we have the freedom to travel and we have the freedom to explore, and I think we all should. So it's something I sign my cards with whenever I send letters to home, and yeah. This is also a picture of Portugal, somewhere I traveled to, in Azores Islands. So for starters, I studied abroad in Italy, in Florence. This was a really amazing opportunity for my education, personal development, and it's Italy, come on, like look at this. So these were some of the trips I took. I lived right along here with my friend Bella in Florence. As a religious studies student and art history student, this was such an incredible experience. You know, at the university, studying art history, oftentimes our classes are online. And you know, you only see these pictures in books, you see these amazing artworks in books, but being able to see them in person was just absolutely incredible. The food was amazing. I mean, come on, who doesn't go to Italy for the food? The pasta, you eat pasta every day, you drink wine every day, you have amazing cheeses, the markets were incredible. That was a big difference in Europe, learning like, okay, I have to go grocery shopping every 2 days rather than once every 2 weeks, you know, because they don't use as many preservatives. And yeah, just interacting with the local community, trying to support the local community was a really cool experience. So we would go to the market every other day. We would go to this restaurant pretty much once a week, best pasta of my life. Yeah, food was amazing. Art history. So some of these were taken in the Uffizi Gallery, Sistine Chapel. I mean, this was like my playground being in Florence. Every time I walked out the door, you just saw amazing frescoes, amazing pieces of artwork, and I just feel incredibly lucky to be able to have seen the world's greatest art pieces. In fact, like earlier this week in my art history class, we were learning about this piece, and I was like, I got to see that like my 2nd day in Florence. Like, what an amazing opportunity. So in terms of education, some of the classes I took a foundation of oil painting class. I love to paint, so being able to have the opportunity to do that in Italy was cool. Here I painted a landscape of a picture I took in Siena. It's still only halfway finished. It's more done than this now. We did still lifes. For some of my art history classes, we would go visit basilicas. I also took an introduction to archaeology class. So we took vessels from the Etruscans and would rebuild them, and now they're either in museums or sitting in archives for researchers to use. And then I also took a pairing wine with food class. So every Thursday we would drink wine and make traditional Italian cuisine, which was a lot of fun. So just some friends. I think the most beautiful part about travel is the amount of people you meet and the amount of places you get to go. I think in the past when I've solo traveled, one of the criticisms I have of it is that, you know, you come home and you don't really get to share those experiences with anyone. You get to talk about them, but being able to share those experiences and come home and, you know, get to reminisce on those is such a beautiful part of traveling. I actually just visited a few of my friends in New York, my friend Nicole up here. My friend Sophia studies painting in Italy, actually, or studies art in Italy. So she's finishing up her last year there. And then a few of my other study abroad friends and some friends from home that came to visit as well. Here's some more, just finishing up my time studying abroad. So some trips we took, the other beautiful part about studying abroad is you have weekends to go travel or breaks. So one of the trips we took was to Lugano, Switzerland. This was beautiful. I had never been to Switzerland before, and it was just such an amazing place to be. The people were so kind. Everywhere you looked, the most beautiful mountains you've ever seen with fog over the valley. It was just absolutely incredible. This was probably my favorite trip I took. I went and visited my roommate, Grace Doobie, back there. And she just made the trip so wonderful. I had spent 2 weeks in Valencia a few years prior with my family, but going there again as an adult was a completely different experience. And just, you know, at the time I didn't have this lust for learning. You know, all I want to do is learn now. So being able to go to Valencia and see these places again, you know, understand that the freaking Holy Grail is in Valencia. When I saw this thing, I was like, this is the one thing I really have to do while we're here. And so we went to, I believe it was called St. Catherine's Cathedral. And Grace can attest to the fact that when I saw the Holy Grail, I was completely besides myself. I was just, what an amazing experience. And it was also nice to break up the trip to visit one of my best friends. So that was a lot of fun. Another really important trip I took was to Prague. Now, this trip was really important. You know, it kind of gave me an idea as to what was happening in the East at the time. You know, I had anticipated going to Ukraine, doing research in Lithuania and Latvia. So for the months I was studying abroad, I was constantly researching what was happening in the East. And Prague gave me a little taste of what are the attitudes towards Ukraine and Russia. And aside from that, oh my gosh, Prague is such an amazing place. It is so beautiful. Every day, I think I walked like 35,000 steps. I was just out exploring. And it was a solo trip as well, so I just got to meet a lot of cool people. Yeah, and I walked everywhere. So this is the famous bridge there. They had musicians and people dancing on the bridge at sunset. It was so beautiful. A ton of artists where I got a lot of my current jewelry. This is one of the world's oldest astrological clocks. It was beautiful. Every hour they would, like, this weird music would come on and these bells, and then these puppet-like things would come out. It was really strange, actually. But it was a really beautiful clock. Went to visit the National History Museum. I spent hours upon hours in there. And for my geology lovers, they had this massive room filled with all these beautiful, incredible rocks and crystals and gems. And I was just in there, like, it was amazing. I visited the John Lennon Wall, which was awesome. It's basically this massive wall where artists come and paint things about the Beatles. And I'm a big Beatles fan, so that was awesome. So, kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier, so I try to make a point when I've traveled in the past to visit Jewish ghettos. When I was solo traveling a few years ago, my first real introduction to the Holocaust, you know, I learned about it in school, but when I really understood the full gravity of the Holocaust was when I visited the Great Synagogue in Budapest. So ever since then, I tried to make a point to visit the Jewish ghettos when I travel. And Prague had a pretty amazing one. Prague is interesting in that the Jewish ghetto was kind of the Nazis used it as a way to show the world, like, oh, we're not actually doing all these awful things. It was kind of like the gold star of the Jewish ghettos. So you walk in and all these buildings are in perfect condition. I mean, it was beautiful. And the synagogues, there were 4 beautiful synagogues there that were in great condition. You know, and then you get into the museums and you see these. So these are artworks from kids in the Jewish ghetto. And there's this really amazing woman who took a lot of leadership with the children during the Holocaust then. Specifically in this Jewish ghetto, she just made sure they had music and art and ways to interpret what was happening. But if you look closely, I know you can't see them well, I mean, it's eerie. These are 4 to 12-year-olds, and their interpretation of what's happening and what they're seeing, even though this is seen as the gold star, you know, they understand what's happening. It's, okay, here's a Nazi soldier. Here are their parents being taken away on the trains that eventually are going to lead up to Lithuania. You know, here's the smoke, here's the bombing of the trains. I mean, and there are so many more. It was, watching it was just, your heart broke, you know, because these kids understood what was happening, even though, you know, how can you really understand that as a child? This was another interesting thing in Prague because, you know, I was starting to see the attitudes towards Russia. So I walked into this craft beer place. I was kind of just exploring. And right away when I walked in, I noticed the Ukrainian flag. And then I started to notice a few more things. Don't mind my bad circles. All over. And there's even more that I didn't circle. There's things about Hitler, things about Russia with a knife through his head. You know, there was Hitler's mustache everywhere. We have a Jewish star up here. We have another picture of Putin. We have all these things. I mean, they hated Russians, absolutely hated Russians. Not so many people in Czechia speak Russian. You know, a lot of Eastern countries will speak Polish, Russian, as well as, you know, Lithuanian or whatever their native tongue is. But here, there's a big push in the East, do not speak Russian anymore. We do not want to show any support towards them anymore. So this was really interesting, and talking to the bartender here, he couldn't really speak English, but he could say some nasty words in English about Putin. So, yes. Another one, on the government buildings, there were always Ukrainian flags everywhere. And also just like, look at the detail here. I mean, everywhere you look on this, the architecture there was just so stunning. I could have just walked the streets every day there without going in anywhere. It was so beautiful. So that kind of concludes my study abroad trip. After I studied abroad, I went to Portugal for 3 weeks with my friend. You know, I was anticipating the next few months were going to be long and kind of hard, so we were like, we need a beach vacation. So first we started off in Lisbon, then we spent a week in the Azores Islands, which are these tiny islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We were actually closer to the States than we were to Portugal. Oh my goodness. People say it's like the Hawaii of Europe, and it is so true. It's just this tiny island, only locals, people travel around on bike. Well, that's a lie actually, because you have to get up these massive mountains. But like in the city or in the little towns you live in, they just travel around on bikes or by foot. And you can drive the whole island in a day. So we were there for 6 or 7 days, I can't remember, and every day we just drove a different portion of the island. We went here a few times because it was just so, I mean, look at that. So, and then these were basically the roads we drove every single day. So you're just looking at this amazing clear water with whales jumping outside. This island is like the hot spot for whale watching and shark swimming, which I didn't get to do unfortunately, but I really wanted to. And the island is also known, which hydrangeas are not native to the island, but they're everywhere. Everywhere you drive, they're just these massive, amazing purple, pink, and yellow hydrangeas, and it's just the most beautiful thing ever. So I love the Azores Islands. I highly recommend going. I will move to Portugal, mark my words. I love it so much. The people were just so kind, and everywhere you went, I mean, these mosaics on the walls, I mean, it was so you have porcelain tile here with cobalt blue, which I recently learned comes from China, actually in my art history class, which heavily influenced the architecture in Portugal. And I mean, the walls, the trees are all purple, and it's just so beautiful. Live music everywhere. The nightlife was amazing. The food was amazing. Yeah. So here comes my trip to Ukraine. Ukraine was probably one of the most impactful experiences of my life. I was invited, I really didn't know what to expect, but I had this month in between studying abroad and doing research in Lithuania and Latvia, and I was invited by my friend, Professor Jeffrey Wills, to come volunteer there. So Jeffrey was my parents' professor at UW-Madison like 30 years ago. And since then, he's just become a mentor for my siblings and I. He comes to our Christmases and such, and he's a really incredible guy. I mean, this guy comes from old money out east, could be living in a mansion, just doing whatever, but he has dedicated his life to philanthropy and rebuilding Ukraine. So he moved there 20 years ago, stopped working at the university, and since then he comes back between Madison and Ukraine, and Zimbabwe sometimes as well. He's got a lot of different projects going. But well, I'll get into more of that later. So he invited me. I spent the first, actually, one moment. So I had to stop in Poland. It was kind of a grueling process getting into Ukraine because you can't fly. You also have to be careful about what border you come in. So I went in through Poland. I was pretty afraid at this point. This day I sent a video to my family and I was like, I have no idea what to expect. Basically, I was like, if I die, I love you. Really dramatic. It was not that bad. But you know, right away when you get to the train station, it's eerie. It's pretty freaky. You're looking around and you only see women and children. They have all of their belongings with them, and it's just quiet. So you know, they're coming back from refuge. Some of them are students coming back from school. A lot of the students in Ukraine went abroad. A lot of them. If you had the money to. It's expensive, but if you have the opportunity to, you would. A lot of these people, I'm guessing, came from the eastern region, like Donetsk, that had just been completely destroyed. So here, we're waiting in line. This was supposed to be an 8-hour bus ride from, I was in Krakow, and then I was going into Lviv. So there's only 2 different ways you can get into Ukraine. It's through buses or trains. I opted to do the bus the first time around. You can't even see the end of the line to border. We waited at border control for 8 hours. 8 hours to get through. And then after that, once you get through the Polish border, you have to go through the Ukrainian border. And I got there and she was like, "What are you doing here? Like, why is this American girl?" You know, it was kind of funny, and then, but it was fine, she let me in. So we waited for hours, and you didn't sleep. I mean, you're on this old Soviet bus that smells bad, it's dark, it's uncomfortable, and it was just, I was like, okay, this is what Ukraine's gonna be like. And then I walk in, and it's this beautiful city, and I'm like, there's a war going on here? I'll explain this while there's a toilet on here in a minute. But Lviv was just absolutely stunning. Beautiful, it's the most European city in Ukraine. But just absolutely beautiful, and it's so lively because so many of the refugees went to Lviv. If you didn't leave Ukraine, you were more than likely ending up in Lviv. Beautiful city for architecture, good city for education, jobs, and they had done a lot of things to protect it. There were a lot of things like this around. I got there, and this is what the toilets were like. In all my travels, I've never seen anything like this, and I could not believe. I was like, there wasn't like any toilet paper in there. I honestly didn't really know what to do, so I just opted to go somewhere else. But I was like, if this is how I have to go to the bathroom for the next month, I'm gonna really, yeah. So looking around Lviv, you know, I said, okay, doesn't look like there's really a war going on here. But then you pay attention to details. At every building, you had all of these sacks protecting the windows. Around every single memorial, you had all of these protecting them. Every museum was closed. Slowly, they started opening up more things, especially in Lviv. So the famous Opera House, which was absolutely stunning, it's in the center of the city. That was one of the only historical buildings open to the public, and that wasn't completely guarded. Then the cemeteries, they were completely overrun. I mean, they went into roads, they went into parking lots, and they all had these big, beautiful bouquets, but they were so fresh. And yeah, a friend of mine that took me near Mihailo, he had a brother in there, and then some friends as well. So it was really interesting to see, you know, and these are just people from Lviv. Usually they're buried back where they're from or right where they die. So that was a really sad experience, but it was a good experience to see. Then I thought this was really interesting. So Professor Wells, you know, he told me one of the biggest concerns after the war is that there's going to be a massive gun problem in Ukraine afterwards, because the mentality is if you see a Russian, shoot a Russian. You know, there is no good Russian. Good Russian is dead Russian. So everyone has guns now. Not everyone, but a lot of people. And so you're walking down the main street and you see this kid holding like an AK-47 shooting Putin, you know, and this guy making money off it. And it wasn't that uncommon to see that. So there is this big fear that Ukraine is going to become like the States afterwards, and they're going to have mass shooting problems. So another big part of Ukraine, you know, you hear these alarms going off all the time. There's kind of always this fear of missiles and being bombed. And Lviv is actually relatively safe. So is Kyiv, the capital city, because they have really amazing drone systems. But it's strange because when you get there, you know, and you hear the alarms going off, you know, for me, I didn't actually experience the alarms until I got into the camp, which I'll get to in a moment. This was after I came back to Lviv afterwards. But the alarms go off and everyone's so desensitized to it. You know, to me, that signaled death. That signaled the bomb is coming. I need to be afraid. I kind of went into fight or flight mode. But for Ukrainians, it had happened so frequently that it was just, I mean, like no one even blinks an eye as these terrifying alarms are going off. And this is in the city center. So it was packed on a Saturday night. I mean, people were just completely, they were desensitized to it. So, again, I didn't experience that until my very first day volunteering with BOR. BOR was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I really had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I had done mission trips in high school, so like rebuilding things and yes. But again, I'd only spent one day in Ukraine, and then I took this night train to Odessa, which Odessa is right along the Black Sea, which at the time was still occupied by Russians, or in control by Russians. And it was kind of dangerous in that, you know, it was right over the Black Sea, so I don't know if any of you've seen maps, but when you look at where Russia shoots missiles from, it's usually from the Black Sea, or from Belarus, or from anywhere on Russia's side. So the alarms were going off all the time, because the alarms didn't necessarily go off if it was just a missile coming to you. It was if you were within the vicinity. I think it was like 600, 500 kilometers or so. So every single day, every single night, the alarms were going off. But these were some of the people I volunteered with. I mean, it was such a beautiful experience, learning every single person here. They weren't in school, they were all here because they had been affected by the war in some way. My friend Vika, her entire family moved to Czechia because her hometown had been completely leveled, completely destroyed. She had lost over half her family in the war. And they were lucky enough to be able to go to Czechia, and she was there for about 6 months. And she came back because she said, "My love for Ukraine, I cannot leave my country. I cannot sit by and watch as Russia destroys it and not do anything." My friend Maria, she had just gotten back literally 3 days prior to coming to the camp after living in Ireland for a year in a one-bedroom apartment shared with another Irish family with her mom and her brother for a year. You know, and they're the lucky ones to be able to leave Ukraine. I mean, no one has any money there. People do, but Ukraine is so cheap. To be able to go to another country and spend the amount of money, the cost of living is really difficult. And that's something I wasn't ready to understand. Like, okay, not only is your country being completely destroyed, but you can't leave, you know, unless someone gives you some type of charity And the beautiful thing is that they came back. Like, that was such a wonderful part about Ukraine, is that people want Ukraine to succeed. People want to see Ukraine win. They do not want to see Russia take over any more countries anymore. So they were ready to fight. And it was really, every single night we did cultural activities, bonding activities, and I made such amazing lifelong friends. These were some of the projects we were doing. So we were working in a military base in here. I'm really scared of heights, so scaffolding was not fun. It was also, all the materials we were using were pretty cheap. They were all donated. And I recently found out that the place we were working at was destroyed, actually, a few months after we had finished up the project, which was disappointing to hear. But BOR is an amazing organization to support. They go all around Ukraine, rebuilding homes, doing other rebuilding activities, and it's completely free. They paid for like our place to stay. There was 5 of us in a room at a time, and the food was like pasta and a hot dog for breakfast, but you know, food's food. Backwards. So one of the nights, you know, and this is the reality of Ukraine when you go into a war zone, is that there is the potential of experiencing a bombing. So the place that was feeding us every day, City Buffet, we went there every day for lunch, had been completely destroyed. It was about our 4th night there. And again, at this point, you know, I had experienced some of the alarms, and we'd go into the basements, we'd go into the shelter. There was just a shelter on the same property. We were staying in this like hospice type thing, so people, military personnel or families would come there kind of as a getaway, a vacation, or if they had an injury, they were staying there to just recoup, get better, and they had lent us some of the rooms to be able to stay there. But every night the alarms would go off. So, and it was weird because they would always come up to me and asked me, like, okay, how do you feel afterwards? Like, they were all completely fine. You know, you could tell they had done this a million times. They had games set, they were singing, they were dancing. It was like going to summer camp, you know? I mean, they weren't singing and dancing. It wasn't like all happy, but you could tell this was their daily life. But anyways, one night the shelters were locked, we couldn't get in. And at this point, you know, I was even like, okay, the alarms are going off again. So we went to the 3rd floor corridor and we were sitting in the hallway, and I'd fallen asleep. I'm sleeping right here. And everyone's staying up, just chit-chatting. And then I wake up to the loudest bang I've ever heard in my life, and the entire building is shaking. And my friend Thomas was standing up at the time, and he had completely fallen over. And everyone just screamed. And then, you know, it was silent for a minute, and then it happened again. And it was, I still don't really have the words to describe it, because it was, up until that point, everyone had seemed so desensitized to it, and then you really heard the fear. This girl behind me just started whimpering. It wasn't even a full-on cry. It was a whimper. You could just hear the fear in her voice, and also the trauma and the pain. We were fine. It was really scary that, you know, the one night we couldn't access the shelters, that it had actually happened. And the next day we found out the place we'd been eating every single day was destroyed, which was also a really strange feeling, you know. And for the next 2 days, the energy was not up. People were really, I was very bothered by it. I was extremely bothered by it. But life goes on. So, aside from that, I mean, what an incredible experience. Every night we would sit around and drink tea and sing songs together. And this is my friend Alicia. She taught me so much about Ukraine and the Ashes. She was rather radical. She was very angry, and after talking with a few other Ukrainians, you know, she was on the extreme end of views. She's the one that told me there are no good Russians. A good Russian is a dead Russian. She said she had completely forgotten how to speak Russian, even though she grew up in the East, where she spoke Russian in her house every single day. You know, but she had a lot of really horrible experiences. So, you know, and every single one of them were there because of that. So I learned a lot from every single one of them. And even here, you can kind of see, I mean, the days were long and grueling, and this was 2 days after the bombing had happened, and my friend Viva, I mean, he's just dead. Not dead, but... So after board, I volunteered with the Ukrainian Catholic University. So this is the university that Professor Willis has spent the last 20 years building. He was asked by the Archbishop of Philadelphia, the Ukrainian Catholic Church, to come to Ukraine to, you know, after the Soviet Union fell, we need to rebuild Ukraine. And that starts with education. So education without corruption, mind you. So the Ukrainian Catholic University was one of 3 universities in Ukraine known for not being corrupt. So, and it's also the #1 university. Every single one of these students had the highest test scores in Ukraine. So they were all so smart. Oh my gosh, I could not believe how intelligent these kids were. And, you know, these students were more privileged than a lot of the other people I'd interacted with. You know, they had money to go to a private institute. They also just had the opportunity to go to school. And it was just such a wonderful experience. We had about 20 volunteers and 150 students. It's a requirement that they can speak another language and a second by the time they graduate. So this was my students daily. We were there for about 2 weeks. This was my co-teacher. He actually could speak Ukrainian, but he didn't tell any of the students until the end because they couldn't speak any Ukrainian while we were there. And if they did, they had to like go up on stage and do a funny dance or something. It was kind of like summer camp. But we were staying in the Carpathian Mountains in Brohovici, and it was such a beautiful area, and we were safe. We were far away from anywhere like missiles could come, and so that was nice. And we were staying in a beautiful monastery. So these are my students during class. Every day we had a different, you know, we just had to get them talking. I feel like I should have gone to school to be a teacher, honestly. I loved it so much. And I taught elementary level, but they could all speak really great English. This was my elective I chose, so I talked about travel, which, you know, upon reflecting was maybe an insensitive choice because they can't leave Ukraine right now. A lot of the boys, you know, boys can't leave Ukraine. Even the girls, like a lot of them had studied abroad or gone traveling. One of my students, Darcia, she was absolutely incredible. Her family had money, so she was able to move to Poland, and the entire time she was in Poland, she spent at the train station helping refugees. And she told me so many stories about just little girls she could speak 5 different languages, which was really helpful as well. About children just being put on trains, and she'd have to help them find a home, and organizing things like that. And she's 19. All of these students are 17 to 21. Other students performing music. We had so many talented musicians there, and I mean, Ukrainian music is just absolutely beautiful, and the different types of instruments they use. This is a really good friend of mine, Kristina. So actually, my mom and my sister spent about a month and a half in Ukraine a few years ago, in the same area, and she lived with them for a little bit. So I got really lucky in the fact that she was a student at the same time I was volunteering. And I ended up staying with her after I finished the school. And yeah, so it was nice to build a lot of beautiful friendships there. Here are just some more pictures at the end of the English summer school. Students put on a performance for us, and we just developed such a beautiful friendship at the end. Not only are they all going through extreme circumstances, but they're also kids. They're teenagers, like they need a friend. So many times, like, I'd be helping a student with homework at the end of the day, and she'd just be crying because of like some friendship issue with another girl, and they just needed someone. And yeah, so we had 20 other volunteers from all other English-speaking countries. And just a lot of fun experiences, and I learned so much. I mean, these students, the beautiful thing is that they're all going to school to make systematic change within Ukraine. None of them were going to benefit themselves financially or anything. They were all going to help rebuild and make systematic change within Ukraine. And they really believed in the power of Ukraine, which was amazing. So that kind of comes to the end of Ukraine. So then I was on my way to Lithuania and Latvia to do research. I stopped in Poland for a night to visit a friend, and I had to take the train out of there. So I went and visited a friend of mine who's teaching in Warsaw. And here we are in Lithuania and Latvia, my wonderful research colleagues. So a fun part of the trip is we like to take pictures at the beginning of the day to see how happy we were, because at the end of the day, we would just be like, I don't know, it was funny. So this is the beginning of one of the days. The dean came with us for the first week of the trip. That was a really fun experience. And here are just some of the things we did. We pretty much worked all day. 8 a.m. until midnight, we were processing data, we were working in the field, or we were going to see Holocaust sites. So this is just some of the things we did. Sasha, we also had a bunch of people come from the University of Philadelphia, and then another graduate student studying Judaic studies from the University of Illinois. This is some of the stuff we did. So we did research using ground penetrating radar to search for mass burial sites from the Holocaust. So here are some examples. This is a map of Liepaja, so beautiful area. And essentially, we were just trying to search for mass graves. This is a different, this is just some of the data we found. So like a slice view. So how we can tell GPR, ground penetrating radar, you kind of pull it like a vacuum, and we're able to see under the subsurface to see, are there potential burial pits? Is there metal under there? Are there bodies under there? And this is just, gives us some indication that there might be. And it can look anyway. We're looking for areas that have right angles. So, okay, there's no way that's made by the earth. It has to be man-made, among other things. We took the elevation everywhere, did soil probing, and that's GPR in action. So, sitting on grids. This was a fun day because Lauren and I, it was kind of the first day that I knew nothing about GPR. I had spent months trying to learn about it, and I went into this trip being like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm so stupid. Like, these are all a bunch of geography students. They've been training for months, and then, to put it lightly, we had no idea what we were doing. It was really learn in the field. And if any of you have taken a class with Harry Joel, he wants you to figure it out. And he will just sit there and watch you as you're struggling. But this was a really fun day because Lauren and I, we just figured it out. We spent hours looking at these graphs, and it was just so exciting to know that we were doing something cool and figuring it out. But then on the other end of it, you're confronted with the fact, okay, amazing, we're figuring this out, we found a mass grave. Shoot, we found a mass grave. We found a burial pit with hundreds of people in there that were killed mercilessly in a day. So this was the site I chose that I'm doing my research on. It's in Aspunte. Everybody in the town had been completely eradicated, or annihilated. And it was a really interesting site because we didn't actually collect very good data there. There were a lot of limitations. It was raining, the soil was just not great. But this was an interesting site because there were no Jews in this town left. And this Christian guy Christian Latvian, his whole family had lived in here his whole life. He fought with the Russian army, and he's the only one putting up memorials in this area. He's the only one memorializing Jews. On his plot of land, he found pictures of mass graves and people being shot. We have very few records of people actually being murdered from the Holocaust, and he had them. And he just felt this guilt. He was like, nobody cares about this. So he put up a stone to represent the 12 tribes of Israel, where basically there were whispers that there might be a mass grave. And our goal this day was to find exactly where that was. So yeah, that's the memorial. You can't really see it, but this was a woman from the community that we met. Here are just some more pictures. Members of the Jewish community, we spent a lot of time with them. Beautiful people, beautiful souls, taught us so much and very passionate. Because there's not much of the Jewish community left. This is just us in the field. This is one of our beginning of the day selfies. That day ended poorly. I think we were all crying by the end of it. Kind of another heavy topic is, every day was really heavy there. Every day you're searching for mass graves of this horrible, if you know anything about the Holocaust, you know that it was just the most horrific genocide in history. And to walk the same paths. Earlier I was talking about the Jewish ghetto in Prague. I learned there that, they were all put on a train. They thought they were going to protection. They thought they were going to be free. They were taken to this site, dropped off right here, and walked through this forest before they were all shot into these graves, which these stones represent. So, we would go to these sites, we would go to these memorials, and to walk the same paths that children walked, that mothers walked, that fathers walked. It was, oftentimes we would leave these days just completely silent. I don't think any of us had the capacity to comprehend what was happening. It's a completely different experience to learn about what's happening in the Holocaust and to actually be there, because you feel it. You feel every ounce of it. And every memorial we went to, they put up these stones to memorialize them. This was another one of the memorials we went to. This was another killing site. They would bring the bodies up here and bury them and take them out. This was another one of the sites we worked at. A lot of the stones in the Jewish cemeteries were taken to make buildings. A lot of them don't exist anymore. So our goal was to find, because after the war, there was some type of people were trying to, put some of these places back. So there's a cemetery here, but it didn't look like that 80 years ago. A lot of the stones were taken into the village to build homes, or they were just completely moved. So these were placed systematically, but we're trying to figure out exactly where should they be placed. Here's some more. Kind of aside from the sad parts of it, we stayed in a lot of beautiful places. I mean, we stayed in this windmill one day. That was so amazing, and there were trolls everywhere in Lithuania and beautiful flowers. This was our whole crew. So Professor Harry Joel, Sasha, Emma, Jake, Amick, Lauren, Martin, myself, and some individuals from the University of Philadelphia. We went and visited a Soviet Union prison. That was a crazy experience. I mean, you'd walk into these prisons and walls were completely black, no windows. There were scratches all in the wall. It was scary. It was really strange. And our tour guide was really funny. He was awesome. We went to visit Fort 9. This was a ring from Varus, the guy who put up the memorial there, that I thought was really interesting. Yes. Kind of tying it up here, so another part of Lithuania and Latvia was you still saw the remnants of the Ukrainian war. You saw, everyone was sharing their support. In Lithuania and Latvia, people were not speaking Russian anymore. I remember we were actually, when we were in Auspute, the older gentlemen we were talking with, they couldn't speak any English. So they asked, can any of you speak Russian? And we had these two young girls there that were translators, and they were like, well, we don't like to speak Russian, but we will, just for the sake of communicating. But they were very hesitant to do it. And you saw these things around the city. Yeah. So, kind of a few takeaways. I think that's the last slide. A few takeaways. Go travel. It's such an amazing experience. You're going to learn so much about yourself and so much about the world. I think as human beings, we have an obligation to take care of each other. Just by the fact that we exist, there's a lot of pain and suffering going on around the world, and that doesn't mean you have to live in that every day and dedicate your whole life to doing things, but we are so privileged as Americans. I have never fully understood the power that America holds in all of us individually. Your vote matters. Whoever wins the next election determines what happens in Ukraine and determines what happens in Lithuania and Latvia. They know in Lithuania and Latvia that if Ukraine loses the war, Russia is coming for them next. And Ukraine is completely dependent on us. They were not shy in telling me that if Donald Trump wins the next election, they will lose the war. And they know they're completely dependent on us, and they hate that. They hate that, but they have to depend on us. Your vote matters. Your decisions matter. Every decision you make here affects the rest of the world. And that was my biggest takeaway. People don't love Americans. People don't really respect us always, but they know that we hold all the power, which sucks. But we do have the most influence. So when you're posting things, when you're reading things, just in your education, just learn. Try to have another perspective because it matters. And you do have opportunities to travel. I know there's so many limitations. I know finances are a huge one, and education and family, but there are resources. I could not have done this trip without the help of, one, Professor Clark writing me letters of recommendation for scholarships, Sean for helping me have access to those funds early, all the other support and fundraising. But there's also other ways. You can stay in hostels, you can do workaways. I have traveled and just volunteered the whole time, staying with families where they couldn't even speak English, and they have been the most beautiful experiences of my life. And they were completely free, and I was completely immersed in the culture. So there are ways. It's hard, it's dangerous, it can be lonely, but it is the most rewarding experience you will have, and you will cherish those memories and the friendships you make the rest of your life. And I'm so grateful to all of you that I was able to share parts of this trip with. Thank you. Like my research colleagues, I could not have survived that without you. By the time I got to Lithuania and Latvia, I was beat. I was so tired. I was exhausted. And all the support, Harry, Joel, Martin, Professor Fink, my roommates, thank you for all of your support and helping me able to do this. It was one of the most profound and impactful experiences of my life. And I can't thank you guys enough. So thank you for coming. And
thanks, Lydia. That's awesome.
Any questions, comments? Yes?
How did you sleep when the alarms were going off all night long?
Did and didn't. The first few nights I really didn't, but then you just get used to it. I was staying in Kyiv, which gets bombed the most, but because it's kind of like you're in a movie, like a Star Wars or something, because these drones are going, the alarms are going off, and the drones are flying around, and you hear an alarm. And I didn't experience any bombing while I was in Kyiv, but you just have to. You just have to get used to it because it happens so frequently. And that's where I started to understand, okay, like they're completely desensitized by this. People, you just have to go on living. So oftentimes most Ukrainians wouldn't go to shelter ever. There was one guy I volunteered with at board and he said this was the first time he'd ever been to a shelter when the alarms were going off. So, yeah. Any other questions? Comments? Okay, well, thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you so much, Leah. It was really fantastic. I think there's some pizza left, I hope, and some stuff, so dig in.